He's our good buddy. He's Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports, NFL and college football analyst, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. And you can find him on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. He was part of Westwood One's pregame coverage of the Super Bowl, and it's great to have him back. All right. Can you picture a scenario where you're not aware of overtime rules in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I can. And I'll tell you why, Dan. A couple things. Number one, it was new this year, right? I mean, it was new in the sense that in the playoffs, at least, no matter what happened, both teams would get a possession. I think there were a lot of people, quite frankly, that were confused by the timing at the end of the overtime period. I think a lot of people probably thought that the overtime was just one period and didn't understand why the Chiefs weren't hurrying up. I mean, it's first and goal, and there's like 8 seconds left. And it's like, what are they doing? There's only 8 seconds left. So I think because of the newness of it, I think that's a big part of it. I'll also say this, 2 things, Dan. Number one, and I know you know this, right? In week 3, if you ask an NFL player who they play in week 5, most of them wouldn't be able to tell you. They honest to God, they would not be able to tell you. And then I've been thinking about this in terms of the overtime rules, right? Does it really matter how much the players knew the intricacies of the rule? In other words, very important that Kyle Shanahan knows what's going on. And he did. He wanted to have the third possession for a reason. The players are basically like the pawns or the pieces on the chessboard, right? Kyle Shanahan is the chess master. He's the one that needs to know. The players are very tunnel focused and need to execute their assignment. I understand why it's a big deal. Ultimately, I think it's being overblown. I don't think it really matters that much.
Why does Chris Jones, the defensive lineman for the Chiefs, know about this? They strategized for 2 weeks. They talked about it, that they hoped the opponent got the ball, they would get it back, and then they were going for 2. So this is a defensive player who's aware of what the philosophy is for the Kansas City Chiefs in case of overtime.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's awesome that the Chiefs knew what they wanted to do in that situation. By the way, I know there's a lot of debate going on, Dan, whether you should take the ball first or kick. I've talked to a lot of smart people about this. It's very complicated. You can make a strong argument either way. Obviously, if you go second, you have the information advantage. If you go first, you have the third possession advantage. The only thing I feel really strongly about is if you do go second, if you do kick, you got to go for 2. Like if you match the touchdown there, you got to go for 2. So kudos to Andy Reid and the analytics folks of the Chiefs for knowing that, for feeling like that was their best option, and for relaying that to the players. I think that's a major positive that the players knew ahead of time, hey, if we get in this situation and we score a touchdown, we're going to go for 2. Ultimately, though, it was immaterial. I mean, the Niners kicked the field goal. The Chiefs scored a touchdown, and the game was over. I don't think it really impacted or affected the game. I think it's just something that we can attach ourselves to after the game and say, it's brilliant by the Chiefs and a bad look for the Niners.
Okay, there's one thing that you're forgetting, and Mahomes brought this up. If I get the ball second, let's say the Niners score a touchdown. I get the ball second. I now get the benefit of 4 downs. Every possession, every situation is 4 downs. We get a first down, then I got 4 more downs, where the Niners had 3 downs, and then they were going to have to kick a field goal. That's a huge benefit for Patrick Mahomes to have 4 downs to get 10 yards to continue to try to score a touchdown.
Yep, I agree. And that's what I call the information advantage, right? You know what you need. You know if you have to go for it on 4th down. Totally agree on that part of it. I guess what I would argue is the Chiefs only scored 1 touchdown the whole game. I mean, they only scored 1 touchdown the entire regulation. So for Kyle Shanahan to say, hey, if neither one of us scores, then we get the ball with sudden death. If we both get a field goal, then we get the ball in sudden death. Again, I think it's really, really close either way. Obviously, it worked out beautifully for the Chiefs. And normally I would say, especially going against the Chiefs and Mahomes, man, maybe you should go second and maybe you should try to match the touchdown and then go for two. But in fairness, they kept bogging down in the red zone. I mean, they only had one touchdown the whole regulation. And even on that last drive, they didn't need the touch. I mean, obviously they got it and they went for on fourth down once and got it, but they didn't even need the touchdown. So I don't know that they would have gone for it on fourth down near the goal line at that situation. Probably, but maybe not.
Yeah, and I also didn't like the play calling in the second half by the Niners. I think Kyle, and I've said this, so I apologize to my audience, but I think he wanted Brock Purdy to be the MVP, and he was going to prove to everybody, I'm an offensive genius, and look at what I created. He was Dr. Frankenstein. Here he is. He's going to go out there, Mr. Irrelevant, is going to win the Super Bowl, and I'm going to prove to everybody I'm a brilliant play caller.
I agree with you 100%. This is probably a little bit of my offensive line bias, but it was late in the third quarter before they called a running play.
I know.
In the second half. And by the way, if you noticed in the fourth quarter and overtime, they really wore down the Chiefs up front. I mean, they were running the ball effectively. Even, it's funny, I think they would have scored a touchdown in overtime, but Kittle's out of the game, and the rookie tight end gets a hold. They run a run to the right, and McCaffrey gets pretty good yardage, but the rookie tight end, number 9, he got a holding penalty on Tranquil. If Kittle's out there, I highly doubt that happens, which is a whole other thing because Greenlaw, I haven't heard anybody say this, Dan. Greenlaw goes out, okay, with a terrible injury, fluke thing. He's a fantastic player. What does Andy Reid do after that, Dan? 2 and 3 tight end sets, right? Which means the Niners have to have their base defense out there because it's 2 or 3 tight ends, which means the Niners have to have 3 linebackers out there. So Andy Reid thought, okay, Greenlaw's out. Oren Burks and this other young kid, they haven't played very much. Let's put them on the field. Like, let's make them have 3 linebackers on the field a lot in the second half. Those injuries, Greenlaw being out, and then Kittle missing some plays on the overtime drive, killer for the night. It's not an excuse, but a killer.
He's Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst. As a former offensive lineman, biggest play of the game, I think, is nobody blocked Chris Jones. How do you go to the line of scrimmage without taking inventory and go, where's the guy who can really hurt us? Now, might be a Snead blitzing, but Chris Jones I have to account for. At least one guy, it's 3rd and 4. Chris Jones disrupts that play. They have a touchdown. How does that happen that the lineman, you go to the line of scrimmage, does anybody call out anything? Does Purdy say, make sure, we got somebody on this guy? How does it work in a situation like that?
Yeah, so it's funny. So you don't want to have to make an audible call unless you have to, because as much as offensive linemen, as much as we like to say that the defensive linemen aren't smart, they know some of the calls.
This is my audible. Somebody, block Chris Jones. Chris Jones. Sad Hut. That's it.
Yeah, that's a thing that people don't realize. If you have a mental error, a missed assignment like that, that's how you lose games in the NFL. It cannot happen. And whoever screwed that up, and the offensive line coach, Chris Forster, I can assure you, they are emotionally devastated. And if they're not, they should be. Because it's one thing to get beat physically. It's a whole other thing to get beat mentally and not know your assignment or
nobody put a body on him, Ross. Nobody touched Chris Jones. Like,
terrible.
Unless you were saying to Chris Jones, hey, you know what? We're really going to mess with him. Nobody's going to block him. He'll be so confused.
Yeah, it was bad. I'll say this, though, and this is another coaching thing, Dan. I thought the biggest play of the game was the muffed punt.
Yeah.
And to me, I've been in those special teams meetings. Ray McLeod screwed up on 3 levels. First of all, those returners are taught, if you can catch the ball, field the ball in the air. I have no idea why he didn't run up there and catch it. Secondly, and I know people know this, but if the ball might land near any of your guys, you run up there and say, Peter, Peter, or poison, poison, so that they know to scatter. But the one that's most mind-boggling to me, after it goes off his foot, Dan, you fall on the ball.
Yeah.
You fall on the ball. And maybe because, these guys are so gifted and maybe their whole life they've been able to just scoop up a ball and run. Ray, you're not going anywhere, man. Fall on the ball. I was taught my first year playing football in 6th grade as a husky, big bone kid, fall on the ball. I mean, it's mind-boggling. That's the only touchdown the Chiefs scored the entire regulation was after the McLeod fumble. He screwed up 3 things on one play. I'm not trying to kill him. Sorry, Ray, but it's brutal to have 3 different mistakes on one play, and then Mahomes throws a touchdown pass the next play or whatever, and the Chiefs have the lead. Awful.
I know that you were part of the pregame coverage of the Super Bowl with Westwood One Radio. Where were you then when the game started?
Right, so I had recorded that part of it with Westwood One a little bit earlier when I was out in Vegas, and then I was actually in the CBS Broadcast Center, which was really interesting, with Tiki Barber and Brent Stover the whole game, Dan. So we were backup in case anything happened out there in Vegas. They lost power or whatever in the city. Kudos, by the way, to the executives of CBS to have a backup like that. So I was literally, Dan, at the NFL Today desk from 2 p.m. when they went live till 11 p.m. at the end of the post-game show. I went to the bathroom a couple times. They even brought my sushi over to me because we had to be ready to go at a moment. I've never watched 4.5 hours of pregame show before in my life. I'm just sitting there with Tiki and Brent just watching every second of the pregame show. And they did at 4 o'clock or something. They said something, something took a hit. So we had almost like a fire drill, right? Where we got ready again and they turned the lights on and we were ready to go. So I was close. 124 million people. I was close.
But wasn't CBS broadcasting the Super Bowl when the lights went out with the Niners and the Ravens?
I think I don't remember, but I think maybe they did. I'm sure after that, because there have been other games in different networks where they've either lost power or audio, and someone's had to do it from the studio or whatever. So it's probably, I'm guessing now for Super Bowls, they all have a backup somewhere, a backup that's not at the site in the city in case something weird happens in the city. I think it's smart.
So you almost called the Super Bowl. Are you going to put that? Is that on your Wikipedia page?
That should be on my. It's funny. My high school buddies asked me, Dan, whether or not what I was doing for the Super Bowl. I said, well, I'm actually going to be in New York. I'm like the backup in case something happens. I had 2 high school friends that volunteered to pull the plug for me. I said, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
We're going to pull the plug on this interview, though. We're done.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks for a great year.
Thank you, buddy. Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst, and almost called the Super Bowl.